Welcome to Programmable, where we talk to tech luminaries to help you with your career. Programmable is brought to you by JDoodle, the AI coding suite for learning and building together. Try coding for free in over 88 languages using our online development environment at jdoodle.com. I'm Lucas Hakewill, and today we're speaking with Puneet Saxena. He's co-founder of Edept, an Indian startup which builds industry-linked programs for students and universities. Before Edept, Puneet worked in sales, investment and product management, most recently as head of investment and business development at Prytech, which invests in and operates software as a service companies. Puneet started his career as a software engineer after his Bachelor's of Technology. Welcome, Puneet.
Thank you, Lucas, and thank you for having me on the show.
Thanks for being here. Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I think you've covered the serious parts. Apart from doing the BTech and starting off with my software, I'm a second-time founder. So I started off with a company way back in 2016 on the robo advisory space. I like to ideate in my free time, anything that catches my fancy, and there's a lot of things that are happening on tech these days. So a lot of tools to play around with. I think that catches my fancy quite a bit. I like to write a bit. I was the member of adult literacy campaigns at my master's. I did equity research. So I'd like to write a lot. I like to keep a track of things around me. So, try to read a lot of books, although I could do more. Also had a website a few years back, which was focusing on financial literacy for people in India. And, it was in local languages. But eventually I had to shut it down because there are only 24 hours on this planet in a day, right? So I think I'd like to sort of tinker around with stuff, do a lot of things. Education is what we've started off Edept with, right? So we're trying to innovate right now in this education segment, and that's pretty exciting. And I like to sort of travel. I like outdoors. I like interacting with people. Try new things out. So I think that's a little bit about myself beyond what I've done at work.
Oh, thank you, Puneet. There's so much there that I really love to unpack. I can't wait to ask you for your book recommendations, for example. Before we dive into some of that, can you tell us a bit about your most recent project, Edept?
Yeah, perfect. So I think you brought it up perfectly earlier. At Edept, it's a company which focuses on careers and global mobility for students. We work with higher education, universities, colleges, where we bring learners and we try to teach them skills that are in high demand. We interact with industry partners like KPMG, Emergo for blockchain, ThriveDX for cybersecurity. These are subject matter experts in their domains of expertise, and we bring them together with the academicians to sort of create new age programs. We also work with several global partners such as yourself at JDoodle to help us craft new products, new tech platforms that we can take to our learners. We work with global recruiters who open up job opportunities. So we bring all of these components together to create a better learning environment for the learners. And essentially what we're trying to do is to create better learning experiences, better job outcomes for our learners. And I think creating a better workforce for the future.
Yeah, fantastic. And so I have a curious question here. In 2024, students have so many options for how they can learn technology. Is a tech degree worth it in 2024?
No, that's a great question. So before I started Edept, and I was working across with a lot of startups, what I realized at that point, my personal opinion before I started Edept was that maybe degrees as an overall concept are losing their charm because essentially what the companies today are looking for are the skill sets. And, there are a lot of assessment tools that the students have to go through. They need to demonstrate that they have the skills before they get in. However, since I've come and I've interacted much more with learners as we go in Edept, what I've realized is that degrees, I do feel that students who come out of school, they are very young, right? And so degrees bring together a cohort of like-minded learners, and they sort of all are heading in the right direction. So everyone learns from each other. In that sense, a degree as a concept, I believe, definitely has value. And within this, tech, I think, is the largest segment of learners in India, for example, going through tech. The change and the pace, as you said, of tech, the changes, the different tools that are coming out is remarkable. And essentially, I think tech degrees are great for new learners just out of school. They are a pedestal for a career, right? So I would still say that students need to keep an eye out for things that they could do on their own even whilst they're doing a degree, because the pace of change is so rapid that sometimes there are new technologies which come in as you go through the degree program. So I think to create like a career out of tech, degrees are for sure a great stepping stone, but then students need to keep an eye out for things that they could do on their own, and there are several self-learning tools that they can use. So I guess so I think tech degrees for sure something that anyone who's looking at a tech career must pursue.
So that sense of I've got a cohort of others around me who are working on similar things together. I'm learning the fundamentals of computer science or of technology that will stand me in good stead. And whilst I might not learn the latest JavaScript framework as part of my degree, I need to augment my learning and chase after I suppose the new and shiny things that may not be included in a degree, but will be important to me as a developer.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So at Edept, you've obviously spent a fair bit of time working with universities and with students, and you get a great view on how are students leaving university? Are they leaving with relevant experience? Are they prepared for the job market? What's your view there?
That's a good question. So, I mean, tying into the last answer, what I said, students have a responsibility for their own career. I guess we at Adept, I mean, what we try to do is to provide every learner with live internships, with projects that helps them, really learn what it is to work in the job, work in a real job, right? Apart from learning as well. And there are lots of avenues today for students to collaborate globally. They could start up something of their own. A lot of students do that. They drop out, they create a new startup. And research is becoming very important, especially in India. There's a lot of focus on research. So, students can collaborate and innovate. And I would imagine that, to that question, I would say that it is the attitude of the learner that is paramount. So I think there are enough and more opportunities for students to gain that relevant experience before they come out of universities. And I guess it's on every student to take that opportunity. On their own, if you just rely on a degree program, then potentially when you come out, you may not have the right skill sets, but I think there are enough and more opportunities for students to pursue alongside these programs. So it really depends on the learner.
Yeah, so it's very difficult for me to expect one thing, whether it be a degree or a single course or a single internship, to give me everything that I need as a student coming out into the job market. I almost have to take charge of this myself and try to pursue many different opportunities.
Absolutely.
This might tie nicely into, I suppose, for the students who are listening, what would be your advice if I'm currently studying a BTech or a bachelor's in computer science? I'm thinking about going to work as a developer or in a technical role, product manager, even start my own startup. What do I need to keep in mind?
I think try different skills, try different things, open your horizons to doing uncomfortable things. You're early in life, so you can take a risk. And we, sort of users must also sort of come out with this mindset of making for an end customer. Right? So whatever you do, keep that end goal in mind. If you're creating a new product, sit down with the users, iterate often. I think there's an adage, fail early, fail fast. I truly believe that everyone should imbibe that. And I think, I guess a lot of people fall in love with the projects that they're creating. But if you can marry the business aspect of your product with what you're creating, I think that's the best skill set that you want to have as you step into this world. So I would say that that's my one advice to early career or founders who want to come into this space.
So keep an eye on not just the technicalities of what you're building, but actually who is the end user? What do they need out of this product or this technology solution?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So Puneet, maybe this is a good segue into a little bit about how you experimented in your career. So you started as a software engineer and moved fairly quickly into, as you said, into equities research and working in finance. Tell us a bit about how you've made career decisions along the way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. To be truthful, I think in my life, I have found my calling by using a natural process of elimination. And what that means is, I started off when I started off after school, I wanted to become an English teacher, right? And my father was not having any of it, so he said, you want to do a degree, and tech was the thing in India, so I started off doing a BTech program. I joined a software services firm, one of the top four at that time. But I quickly realized that that was not to my liking. So I studied hard, went to a B school. Even within a B school, what caught my fancy initially was marketing and branding. And so I did my first internship at a company called Reckitt Benckiser, which sort of comes up with all of these, products on the retail segment and on the pharmacy segment. And they asked me to do a field sales role for one of their products, and I did not like that. So I sort of said, okay, let me try finance instead. In my second year I did finance, and post that I sort of landed up in equity research role, initially with Lehman Brothers and Amora. In equity research, sort of it brought together my love for writing. It brought together the finance skills that I learned in my business school, and I was focusing on tech. So it brought together the learning that I had in my undergrad. So I guess that was very interesting. Eventually, I sort of transitioned to a product role at Bloomberg. And Bloomberg, I call Bloomberg not the news, but the finance side of it. I call it as one of the largest fintechs in the world. So again, I was interacting a lot on the technology side and the finance side, more on investments. But I think this gave me the exposure also to sales and business development. So I did a couple of roles over there. I did sales. I I went out with salespeople. I did a lot of training sessions for them, and I think this was great for me because it gave me a lot of confidence to sort of go out and talk to end users and try to understand their perspective of a product. Along the way, I sort of did my CFA, completed my CFA charter. I launched a robo advisory startup, which is again in the finance segment. So, I've come a long way from where I did my BTech, but what I've sort of arrived at is you need to try a lot of different things, see what works for you. And the best outcome for me has been to marry some of the things that I've liked or that have worked for me and try to get to a position where you can marry some of those skill sets to reach where you are. So even at Edept, for example, where within the education space, I manage the technology part of Edept. I manage internationalization for our company, so partnerships. I also look at finance, right? So again, a lot of things that I've done in my previous past, I've sort of come together, and I feel that's the place where I can make the most difference. So I guess trying out a bunch of things again, as I said.
So for someone who's studying software engineering or a BTech who maybe doesn't want to jump straight into a software engineer role, there is hope.
Absolutely.
They can explore alternate career paths as well.
Yes. Yeah, and I think as you said,
really
the world is the world is the oyster
together,
right now. Yeah.
Being able to marry together your interests, you wanted to be an English teacher, you love communication and the written word and from what I can gather, education. So it sounds like you're really able to build that into Edept.
Yeah. Exactly.
Brilliant. So Puneet, I'm interested to learn a little bit more about your robo-advisory startup Can you tell us a bit about the story? How did you start? Where did you get to? What happened?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, as I said, even in my free time, I like to ideate a lot. And whilst I was at Bloomberg, I realized that, Bloomberg as a tool is meant for professional money managers. But a lot of what Bloomberg does is very relevant for even retail customers, retail investors such as myself. So I had an idea of how could I create, an advisory tool essentially which can go to people who are not in the world of finance. So if you ask somebody who does not understand what a share market is, what an equity is, and you tell them, what are your financial goals, you ask them the simple question, what are your financial goals, and basis their answers you can create an investment portfolio for them. I think that was what I wanted to build, because I thought that, a lot of technicalities around finance are something that people don't want to know. We can take that on our side and create a tool around it. And you ask them what their ambitions are on the financial side. And sort of we do the heavy lifting of creating the portfolio, managing it on their behalf. And that's what we did. So we launched a robo advisory startup. We did that again in multiple languages. India is a country of, 1.4 billion people, but also, between such a big population, you have tens of languages, right? So the real India is, speaks local languages. So we launched it in multiple local languages so that it goes to tier two markets where people really need this kind of information. In larger cities, there's an exposure, but in smaller tier two, tier three markets, people don't really know a lot about investment. So we started off with that as a vision. We raised money a couple of times. We got incubated. We sort of did a lot of things right as it went. And the only one part that, as early founders, we maybe underestimated or did not think about was regulatory challenges, right? So things around doing KYC and how do you do it, and licensing and things like that, because finance overall is a very regulated market anywhere in the world. And so I think eventually we realized that if you have to make it scale, you need to raise a lot of money, to spend that in marketing and things like that. And uh, at the time that I did this, I was doing multiple roles. I was with Bloomberg, then I was with Prytech, and I was managing this on the side. So eventually, I had to do one of the two. I could not do both together. So I eventually, another company that was doing this full time and really liked our product, we sold our company to that company, and I think they're still there. They're doing good work around the finance space. So eventually, a good outcome for everyone, but a lot of learnings as we went along.
That's a terrific outcome. Being able to sell your company to someone who will take it forward. And it sounds like there was an important education and also an important, I suppose, equity or equality piece here, where you're not simply publishing in English or publishing in Hindi. You're going to multiple local or vernacular languages. How important is that in a market like India?
Well, it is important if it's important if you're launching for that segment, right? So uh, I think India is a very, out of 1.4 billion people, maybe 300 million people speak English very well. And the language of business is English in India. In fact, English as a language unites a lot of different regions, because people in the north might speak Hindi, people in the south might speak their own languages in different states. But then, how to communicate, I think English brings it together. Having said that, as you go to tier two towns and villages, vernacular languages are still the primary mode of communication. So if you're creating a product which is meant for that kind of a population, then vernacular languages is still the way to go. If you have to create a product which obviously caters to people in the cities, then English is good enough, and that you'll get a bunch of people who speak good English. But yeah, vernacular languages is still, and it's a fast growing market, because initially when internet came, it came first to big cities, then it sort of went down to the villages and smaller towns. So now people in these towns have access to social media and other pieces of the internet, where I think vernacular and languages are sort of gaining pace. There's not enough content, for example, in Malayalam or in Bengali, right? And these are languages which are spoken by millions of people. So there's still a lot of scope for it, and it really depends on where you want to go. But I think in India, local languages plays a big part in what's your selling strategy.
And is this an important part of Edept's growth strategy?
Not yet. I think education, and especially higher education in India, is transitions to English. When you are in the schools, in lower grades, for example, there you have a lot of local languages. But as we transition to higher education, it still is English. So in that, we don't see language as a major challenge or a major opportunity as we go along. However, that said, the government is bringing in new aspects to language around the India knowledge system. And a lot of that might have things that they take from Sanskrit, because our scriptures have been written in a special language. So some of that will come into the education system eventually locally. But at the moment, English is good enough for higher education.
Puneet, you've moved around India a lot yourself. You studied in Kolkata, in Lucknow. Now you're living in Bengaluru. What's your view on where is it most exciting to be in India right now?
Well, I always say this, that I've seen ambition spread across all of India, right? So I would not pick one place right now. I do travel all across. So I'm from Delhi, but I don't live there. My parents live there. I travel all around the country to meet our partners. I found great partners in the remotest of places, right? So we have a developer who's in a tier 3 town, a designer who's in a small village. And while large cities like Bangalore, Mumbai, they attract like-minded people. So in Bangalore is the biggest startup hub in India. Mumbai is the largest financial hub in India. So, if you want those opportunities, the large cities are the place to be. But really, it's an exciting time to be in India because, as I said, you can move around and you can find interesting people, startups, opportunities everywhere you go. So I guess overall, it's great to be here. I would not pick one place per se, which is the most exciting. I just feel that even COVID has opened up remote working as an opportunity, such a lot that you could essentially find interesting things to do wherever you go.
It sounds like it's important to explore opportunity outside of just what you would see as the traditional big or tech cities.
Absolutely.
Now, Puneet, a theme that I've heard across, I suppose, your life story is you're really interested in lots of different areas. Like me, I think you're a little bit of a generalist and interested in many different avenues, and you've had to make decisions in your life as to where shall I focus at any given time. Can you talk a bit about that that moment where you were trying to decide, hey, do I keep pursuing my startup? Do I quit my job at Bloomberg or at Prytech? Talk about what that decision point feels like.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, there are several considerations at play when you're wearing multiple hats. One is, are you able to really devote the time that each of your job or each of your role requires, right? So if I'm neglecting one of that, I'm not doing justice to that part of the business. When I was doing my startup, I realized that I was spending a lot. Obviously, I had to spend a lot of time at my work, a lot of work to do. And when I came in the evenings and worked on my own startup, I worked on even on my own website at some point. Uh, I was taking away time that I was even spending with family at some point of time. So I realized that work and then your maybe your side business or interest or your startup and your family, all of it is important. And at some point, you have to say what's most important for me, what's priority for me. For me, that point came when I had children of my own, and I had to really take a take a bet on whether in the evenings am I in my room and sort of working on my own things after my job, or should I be spending more time with young kids? And it's important for me to do that as well, as we bring them up. And so at one point, I really came at a point where I'd say I had to cut one of them off, right? And essentially, the call that I took at that point was to maybe shut my website or to move on from my startup. But yeah, it's a choice that everyone has to make for their own self. What's most important for me? It was important at that point of time to run my household and also to spend time with my family, and therefore, I had to pick one of the two. If I were younger, maybe 10 years back, if I did not have children, maybe I would have picked, doing the startup. So it really is at what stage are you in your life and what's important to you. And I think that's something that everyone has to answer for their own self. What do you want to do?
There's a huge opportunity cost pursuing a startup, when you could otherwise be earning a salary. Puneet, I guess I'm not sure how much you're able to say about this, but I'm interested in that process of getting your company acquired. What was that like? You've made this decision. Now I think, well, I can just switch it off, but we've built so much value. How do we realize this value? So this was a great outcome for you to be able to sell this company. Can you tell us a bit about that process?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, this came a little naturally because we were collaborating with another company that was using some part of the IP that we already had. So the product had gaps which we could fulfill. And at a point in time where we were deciding how to take this forward, we came to a decision that sort of integrating what we had with, the product out there was the best outcome for that company. It was the best outcome for us because we were essentially thinking of, how to scale, whether to come in full time. And essentially, I wanted to take this call of not being part of that group overall, but still leaving it in good hands, so somebody who could take it forward. And so, and we had people on our payroll. So, how do you not shut it down, but essentially move it to potentially new partners? And because we had a working relationship with another company, we knew what were the synergies. We could do it easily. I guess for everyone who's at that point where you are trying to sell a company or sell a product, it's always easier to work with somebody who you know. In our case, we were lucky enough to have somebody like that who knew our product was working with us, and so we managed to do that. But yeah, I think uh, I would say that it's a challenge if you just pursue that as a standalone activity. If you have somebody who's already there, it's much easier.
Yeah, you already have the relationships. So the startup was called Nevo, is that right?
That's right.
Fantastic. A really interesting story, and I think it says a lot about you that you had that experience of building a startup and selling it, and you've decided it's time to do it again. How did you? What was the moment when you decided it's time to start something new for Edept?
It's a great question. So last year, it's a tough year for startups and for investments overall, right? So in my previous role, I was working with a lot of our portfolio companies, more in an advisory role, trying to sort of bring them into Asia, trying to find acquisition targets for our portfolio companies. And so, there was a moment in time where it was becoming tougher to do so. One, because a lot of companies were tightening up their belts and saying, we want to focus on what we're doing right now. We're not looking at growing. And so a lot of that was becoming less relevant for companies, and profitability is gaining, everyone has to be profitable these days. So at this point of time, I came across, again, tying into the previous story, I was working with the great company and a great founder in Gaurav, who's my founder now at Edept, co-founder at Edept. And essentially, what we were doing is we had a a relationship where we were selling our education products to his company, and we had taken this product in a big way in India. He was the largest customer in India, and so the opportunity presented itself last year in where we could come together and do something of our own. And essentially, I had again a good relationship with somebody. I'd known him for 3 years. I worked with his team, so I knew what I was getting into. And so when we started off Edept, it sort of came off maybe good timing, and having again that right relationship that I knew of before. And so when I was getting into it, essentially I was in a way de-risking myself. I wasn't getting into something which was completely an unknown. Um, and at the same time, it was in line with what my ambition is. What we were doing on education, I think we have an opportunity now to take it forward. So I love the team. I think it's a great team, and so I guess it's exciting to be back in the game, to driving it as we see fit, right? And really not being in that advisory role, but being more in an operating role. And so yeah, it's an exciting time for us to be here, and it's an exciting time to be in education.
It sounds like the timing of this was what was most important is I have a relationship with someone who I trust and who I believe that we will work together really well. How important is it to you, I suppose, for a technical person, it can be easy to think, I'll just do it all myself. It's a lot easier on my own rather than trying to involve someone else. How important is it to you to have a team around you?
So I've learned it the hard way. I am somebody who works, or at least in the past, worked better as an individual contributor, right? Because I almost had this mindset that, as you said, I'll do it on my own, and that's the best way to do it. But essentially, if you're not involving people around you, I think that leads to suboptimal outcomes, and you can't be good at everything, right? So um, even when I started and I took this learning from my previous startup, you almost have to delegate and you almost have to collaborate if you have to move forward, right? And one of the learnings that we have, from my previous role, at least I had this learning, was if you have to be successful at what you do, then you can start off on your own, but then you need to collaborate. And eventually, if you need to grow, you need to delegate, right? So you need to give that responsibility to someone trusted with that person to do it well, then do the next thing, because unless you do that, you can't do more, right? So if you're good at doing partnerships, the only way that you can grow that is create a partnership, give it to somebody to execute it who could do that well, move on to the new bits, and so on and so forth. So again, somebody starting off, and I saw this again when I was considering what to do. Last year is to I was working with another startup, both of them from the technical field, and they were creating a product. And again, that thought of we'll do it together, we don't need anyone else, and all of that. But I think eventually that leads to suboptimal outcomes. So I guess um, I think it is very, very essential for people to understand that they could start on their own, but they need to rely on alternate viewpoints, and they need to eventually trust other people to take some part of the responsibility. Unless you do that, you can't grow, right? You can't scale at what you do. And that's what my learning is.
Yeah, so it can work from the beginning, but if you're going too long on your own, it's kind of a failure pattern.
Yes. Yeah.
As head of investment, you worked with lots and lots of startups. I'm sure you saw some great ones and some not great ones. For students listening who are thinking about working for a startup, how do you think they can pick a winner?
That's a great question. I think it comes from maybe two or three things that everyone has to look at. One is, how well do you understand the space? Some of the startups and what they're doing could look, very, very interesting when you look at it from a distance. But if you have to get into one, first understand the space, understand how the startup, does it have a big enough market? What's the pricing? What's the competition? Essentially, do a SWOT analysis around it and try to understand all the aspects of the business. Second, do you think that you could make a difference in that startup, right? So do you have the skill sets, and in there is there something that you can bring on day one to a particular startup is something that you need to absolutely look at. Don't when you're doing a startup, don't think of as a job. So in startups we say you have to wear multiple hats. You need to step in if something goes wrong, right? Because, and this is especially true if you're in joining an earlier startup. It's much more of you need to do and you need to say yes to a lot of things which you may not know, and you don't essentially go in with the mindset that I would only do X, Y, Z. And I think the final and the most important part of it is what's the team around you? How's your manager like? What's that interaction like? Because there's a lot of stories around people getting into great startups, but in a work culture which is either very toxic or it's essentially does not tie in with what any particular person think about. So in that sense, you need to almost do a due diligence on the team around you, and due diligence on the team that you are joining. If you've done that well, then I guess that's the way to go about doing a startup. A startup always looks very interesting, as I said, a sexy thing if you are, especially if you're young and you want to take a risk. But if you want to make good career out of it, essentially spend more time at the outset understanding it before you join it. I think that's the way to go.
Early in your career, you took a sales role, which your first sales role you didn't enjoy very much, but you came back to sales. How important do you think, I suppose, are there any sales mindsets that a technical person can learn from? What did you get out of doing sales roles?
Well, I guess if it were up to me, I would make sales mandatory for every technical person, and I'll tell you why. Right. So as I said earlier, people in technical roles, essentially, a lot of them I've seen have a perspective of what we are making. Uh, they fall in love with the product. What a sales role allows you to do is get a perspective from a customer viewpoint. And essentially, where even when you're pitching your product to the customer, um, there's a way of how you do sales, right? So there's a way in which you say, hey, this is my product, ABC feature. But that's not, essentially, if you start sales, you almost start like that. But essentially, you understand that's not the way to do it. The way to do it is more consultative in nature, understand what the requirements are, how do you fit or not fit, and be open to saying we don't fit as well. And that's essential part of a sales role as well. So I think interfacing with the end customer, that's what sales brings in. Sales also helps you improve your communication skills. I do feel a lot of technical people sort of do not, they're doing it on their own, or they're collaborating on, Discord or other channels, and they don't have live interaction. So when you're in front of a customer, to actually do it in person, to understand, to get those visual cues, it almost helps you with your communication. And I believe communication not just leads to better products, it leads to better life outcomes. So I think that's what sales also brings in. So I guess for sales is something, you're right, I didn't enjoy sales when I went in the first time. I was young. I thought I had a specific mindset to what I wanted to do. But essentially, after 6 or 7 years, when I went back to it again, I truly understood, having worked for a few years on what the opportunity sales gives you. And I think everyone, if you have the ability or the opportunity to get into a sales role, and especially if you're a technical person, it's uncomfortable, but everyone should do it. And trust me, the other side of that role, however uncomfortable at the beginning, the other side of that role, you'll be a better person for it.
Sounds like there's no hiding as a salesperson. You've got someone on the other end of the phone, or you're speaking to someone, you can see their reactions. You're going to know if they don't want your product because they don't hand over their money.
Yes, absolutely. And at times, in a sales role, you get great product ideas, right? A lot of things that you can actually bring into a product is from a conversation with a customer who said no. But here's how you could do better. A lot of that goes back to product. That's on the ground intelligence. All of that comes from sales. Would not be something that you get from just sitting on your own researching. I think it's critical, especially if you're creating a product, to go out and do sales.
And something that I think many people don't consider is that if you are a technical person and maybe you're a people person and you want to move into sales, the upside's amazing. You can make a lot of money in sales if you don't enjoy coding as a technical person.
Absolutely, and there are career opportunities these days. In fact, there are boot camps. We were running boot camps in one of our previous companies, which was a cybersecurity education company. We started off by saying, "There's a boot camp for a cyber analyst," but essentially we created another one for salespeople in the same space, right? For people who know about cybersecurity, and then how do you go out and sell, and what are the spaces where you can sell it in? So and there are a lot of people who could start in technical roles, such as myself, understand that probably that's not your true calling, and sales gives you that opportunity to still use a lot of what you've learned in a sales role, and pays well as well.
Cybersecurity is obviously still a massive growth area. What do you see as the exciting areas of technology for students to be looking for?
Well, I think we, even as Adept, our focus is on looking at those segments where we feel there's a long-term opportunity in jobs: data science, DevOps, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, machine learning. These are all segments, even programming to a certain extent, are all areas where there will always be demand. And even if new tools come and change a little bit about on how you do those things, essentially the newer tools will help you become more efficient, but will not replace you overall. And I think that's one of the things that everyone has to keep in mind nowadays when they get into any of these roles. So how do you work with almost an assistant, and that assistant is like a tool that works with you. But there's a demand for all of these, and we at Adept, as I said, we're focusing on all of these areas because we feel that there's going to be a secular demand for some of these roles 5 or 10 years also into the future, and they'll keep changing. Requirements will keep changing, and that's why we have industry partners who can bring in their expertise and sort of change the tools and change some of the learning methodology and change some of the curriculum as we go along. But these are things that are here to stay.
What areas of study do you think might be at risk or might be lower demand?
Yeah, I think everyone's thinking about the same thing, right? And so I guess most of the stuff that is repetitive, most of the things which are essentially no value add. I'll tell you an anecdote. When I started off in my first company, and most of the software firms in India are outsourcing firms. We get a lot of projects, and we're just delivering them. The first project that I got was from a company called FedEx, right? Essentially the product had nothing to do, or the project had nothing to do with technology. Essentially, they used to send over a bunch of drawings or a bunch of images, and what we were doing, a lot of people were doing was, I was on the testing side, but a lot of people were doing was just opening up the images, copying the barcode at the bottom and putting it into an Excel. Now, something like that, there's no room for something like that in the world today, right? Because that will just go away. So any task which does not essentially require intelligence, but just requires grunt work, just requires you to observe and deliver, you're not adding anything of your own, will go away. And so everyone has to upskill. It's no longer okay just to do things such as these, right? Taking stuff from internet, putting into Excel sheets, things like that. All of that will go away because you're not adding value. Any task where you're not adding value will go away. And so the lowest rung of jobs, which are repetitive and just answering customer queries, FAQs, and things like that, where you're not doing anything, I think will go away first, right? So, but it also gives the opportunity for everyone to upskill and move to the next level, or move to the next level on how we can work alongside these tools to make it a better customer experience or make it a better output for the customers, right? So in a way, even if jobs are going to sort of go away, I think a lot of new opportunities will open up by, some of those jobs will essentially not go away, but transform into something new. And I think that's an opportunity for everyone to look for.
It's an exciting opportunity. And Puneet, you're well read. You're interested in the future. What do you see as, I guess, what excites you most about the future?
Yeah, I think what excites me is the rapid change. What also excites me is the uncertainty of it all. And I also see the generation of today, whether you call them Gen Z, Gen AI, or whatever it is, I think they are willing to take that plunge and they are willing to take on new things. Um, they're also open to a wide variety of experiences. And I guess, all of that sort of combines to give me a sense that it's a very exciting place to be in right now. I think more than any time in the past, you could make a substantial difference and you can bring in tools much faster and you could do a lot more of your own because there are so many assistants that you can use virtually. So I guess this technical advances is what excites me the most. People who are creative can absolutely make use of all of these resources to come up with essentially products that you couldn't maybe 5 years back, right? You couldn't think of that. So I think all of this is very exciting.
So much change. And Puneet, you mentioned at the start you love to read. I'll put you on the spot. Do you have any recommendations for great books that have helped you to change your life?
Well, honestly, I have transitioned from reading a lot of fiction initially to reading a lot of books about people creating things, right? And also reading a lot of, self-help books, to reading history books to understand what our history is like, because I, essentially also thought that history repeats itself and you must know, where you come from, what's happened in the past, and, in different ways it can come back. Right. So I have a bunch of books even behind me. Right. So I kind of like, I, as I said, I've loved being in the fintech space. And so, there are books like Flash Boys, which talks about, the fintech and the trading platform. I love the book. Um, there's one book which I've read twice. Maybe that's one of the only books that I've read twice. Is Change is Faster Than You Think. And I guess the book talks about how you're thinking about some things, but the change is faster than what your thought is. And I've read it twice. I read it a few years back and I read it recently, and it still makes a lot of sense, and a lot of things that it's saying sort of comes true. So I guess those are two books, but there are a ton more. I mean, I'll have to think about some of the ones which I could recommend. Absolutely, listeners could reach out. I could give them my top.
Fantastic, Puneet. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that I should have asked you?
No, I think this was a great conversation. I would say, thank you for having me on the show. It's the first time that I'm here and sort of talking about these things, and I've really enjoyed it. I guess people who are interested in knowing more or having a conversation can always reach out to me via LinkedIn or other resources. I'm always available for a conversation. But yeah, I think I've really enjoyed this one.
Fantastic. And we'll share links to your LinkedIn, to Edept, and anything else that we mentioned in today's show notes. Puneet, thank you so much for joining us on Programmable.
Thank you, Lucas, and thank you for thinking about me for this show. I'm honored to be on the show.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Listeners, you can find Programmable anywhere you find your podcasts, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can find JDoodle at jdoodle.com, and I highly encourage you to jump online and try coding in over 88 languages. It's free and really, really quick. Thanks again for listening. Look forward to hearing you in the next episode.
Thank you.